everyone. Welcome to our third Impact Call of the year, announcing the results of our second quarter activities. We're thrilled to see that many of you on the call today joined us in May, so thanks again for joining us. And for the first-timers, welcome. If you are new, this is our attempt to evolve the definition of transparency and get you our results in a more timely and comprehensive manner. And we also really want this to be interactive, so we do hope you'll have lots of questions for us. We've kept half the time to be able to have a dialogue with you. So before I introduce our speakers, I wanted to briefly touch on the results of our last Impact Call in February and May and set the scene for today's call. In addition to being featured in the Washington Post and the Nonprofit Times, there was a great dialogue about this idea on the GuideStar blog. If you did weigh in there, thank you so much. This time around, we're diving into our new strategy, and we'd really love to get your feedback on the ideas we present and really anything we talk about today. So to do that, please weigh in at npo.gs/GuideStar2020. I'll say it again, npo.gs/GuideStar2020, and we really do hope to hear from you. So one last thing, I want to note that our next Impact Call will be held on November 10th at 2 p.m. Eastern. So please go ahead and mark your calendars, and you can go ahead and register as well. That link is at npo.gs/ImpactCall4. So just some very quick housekeeping items, and then we can get started. First, we're live tweeting during today's presentation using the hashtag GSImpactCall. So we hope you can join our conversation on Twitter. And secondly, we're happy to take questions from all of you during the discussion today. You can submit questions via Twitter or using the chat box in WebEx. And finally, we will send all of you an email with today's PowerPoint and a recording of this live presentation in a few days. So without further ado, I'm thrilled to introduce Jacob Harold, GuideStar's President and CEO, and James Lum, our CFO. Jacob, it's all yours.
Terrific. Thanks a lot, Lindsay, and really thrilled to dive into our latest Impact Call. I'm going to be covering two things today. The first is our strategic plan that we call GuideStar 2020, and then second are our programmatic results, and then I'll hand it over to GuideStar's Chief Financial Officer, James Lum, to discuss our financial results for the second quarter. So this image here represents the inside of our strategic plan, GuideStar 2020, that's been more than a year in the works. Now, we showed you this last time, but we didn't go into much detail about the content of the plan. So I'm going to spend a bit more time today doing exactly that. And this was very much a document that we created in consultation with the field. I went around on a listening tour talking to dozens of nonprofits and associations and foundations around the country, asking a simple question, which was, how can GuideStar be most useful to the nonprofit field? Now, the metaphor that we've tended to use to talk about GuideStar's work is a supply chain. And think about a supply chain for a shirt. You know, the cotton might be grown in a farm in Louisiana, and it might then get shipped to a mill where it's turned into cloth, and then shipped to a tailor who turns it into a shirt in another city, then shipped to a warehouse in another city, and then to a retail store in a fifth city. And it's that series of steps that get the cotton from one place in one form to be the shirt that's on my back. And we think about a supply chain of information that flows throughout the nonprofit sector in the same way, and that it's our job at GuideStar to help make that supply chain work a little bit better. And you'll see that that's the metaphor that we use to structure our strategic plan. In the strategic plan, there are three pillars. And go figure, they all start with the word data, because that's really what GuideStar is all about. Data innovation, data collection, and data distribution. So as I explain the strategic plan, I'm going to use this basic three-part framework. And let me explain how it's like a supply chain. And it's really quite simple, that the first part of our work is the collection of data. It's bringing data in from many different sources, most notably the IRS Form 990, but also directly from nonprofits through GuideStar Exchange and through many other sources as well. So the collection process also involves us organizing and making sense of that data. And then there's a flow of data through distribution. And then the second part of that is the other side of the supply chain, where we're figuring out, once we've pulled the data in and we've made it useful, how do we get it into the hands of various actors, whether nonprofits or foundations or journalists or researchers, bankers or lawyers, whomever it may be who needs our information, individual donors. And so the second part is distribution. And we believe once you've created that supply chain from collection to distribution, that you can then innovate on top of that. And that's the third bucket that we use to organize our plan. So let me talk briefly about each of these three sections, and then I'm going to give two particular examples of new programs that we have as part of this plan. So the first piece, data collection, involves 5 separate components. I'm not going to talk through them in great detail. What I do want to focus on are the 3 characteristics that we think are important for data collection. The first is more. We just need more data. We have about 2.5 billion pieces of data right now, but given the complexity of the nonprofit sector and its sheer size, we need more data, data on more organizations, more types of organizations, such as data on churches and schools, and then more information about each individual nonprofit. We need better information, higher quality information, but also new kinds of information. I think it is better to have a multidimensional view of a nonprofit where you understand not just its finances, but also its programmatic work. And that's inherently superior. So we need to have better information that reflects that diversity and complexity in the nonprofit sector. And then finally, we want data faster. When you fill out a tax form, it's about the prior year. You've got several months to fill it out. You can extend it, and it takes a while for us to digitize it. That can often mean that the data that we have from publicly available sources is more than a year old. Now, it's high-quality data, but we also want to figure out how do we have data that is more recent. And in fact, that's exactly what these impact calls are. They're an attempt for us to get you information about GuideStar's own work, evolution, and results more quickly. So those are the 3 pieces of our data collection strategy, which then plays out in a number of concrete ways. I'd be happy to talk about more later. In terms of data distribution, we see this playing out also in 3 different ways. So the first is reach. And I like to tell a story that I once had brunch with a friend of mine who worked at Google, and I was proudly talking about GuideStar's work, and I said that we had 7 million users every year. And as you can imagine, my friend at Google kind of smiled at me, and he said, well, we have 7 million users every minute. And that was a reminder to me that if we really want to reach the stakeholders of social change, the donors and the nonprofit leaders who help to drive the work of the nonprofit sector, we really need to figure out how to reach them where they're at and to extend our reach beyond just GuideStar.org. The second piece is depth. And with depth, I just mean that we want to see more and more data available through more and more sources. So not just that you can get basic data about a nonprofit on many different platforms, as opposed to just GuideStar.org, but also through your search engine or your financial institution or an e-commerce platform. But then when you're on one of those other platforms, you can get a lot of good data. So it's a deep kind of distribution. So for example, a financial institution might offer a user interface through a website. I do my personal banking on Wells Fargo, and there's a Wells Fargo interface that allows me to see basic information about my finances. I hope that we can soon have data about nonprofits available through people's online banking interfaces, and that it's deep data, that it gives a rich sense of what nonprofits are really about. And then finally, interconnection. And here I just mean that we want to see all these different platforms linked together in a meaningful way so there's less waste and more connection. So for example, we've talked before about Simplify, which is a new product that we launched in partnership with the Technology Affinity Group, which is a mechanism that allows GuideStar's data to show up in grants management software. And grants management software are the computer programs used by foundations to manage the grant process. And so through this kind of interconnection, we'll be able to have a nonprofit fill out their profile once on GuideStar and know that that information is automatically flowing into the programs used by foundation staff. Now, finally, with data innovation, I want to talk about 3 ways that we're really trying to innovate our work. So the first one I've already mentioned is program focus. And what I mean by this is going beyond and building on top of financial data. Historically, the bulk of GuideStar's data has been financially oriented. It's come from what is, in many ways, simply a tax form, the Form 990. That's been an incredibly valuable baseline for us, but we really think that it's essential for us to innovate and bring in other kinds of data about the people served or the community served or the ecosystem served by nonprofits. Thirdly is context. We want to offer a sense of the context in which nonprofits are operating. So, for example, you can imagine that a organization that works on literacy in Chicago, we would like to provide the literacy rate in Chicago. Maybe information about the amount of philanthropic and government capital that's available to fund literacy in the Chicago area. Maybe basic data on the educational system in Chicago, et cetera. Maybe research about what works to really help drive up literacy rates. So we want to put the information that we already have about nonprofits in a broader context. And then finally is convenience. And in our world where we're all getting used to having access to any information we want on any device at any time, we know that we really need to drive up the ease of access and use of our data. That means rethinking some of our user interface, our graphic design, thinking about mobile access to our data, and then projects like Simplify that I already mentioned that make our data available on other platforms. So that's the basic framework of our strategic plan, those 3 pieces: data collection, distribution, and innovation. Now let me mention 2 of the particular programs that we're launching as part of this new plan. I think they're indicative of the direction that we're going in. So the first one is a new level of GuideStar Exchange called Platinum. Now, GuideStar Exchange is the mechanism that allows a nonprofit to share information directly with GuideStar. It doesn't have to go through the IRS or through any other channel. It's directly with us. That allows us to have information that's more up to date and to ask questions that aren't on the Form 990. And we've had more than 100,000 nonprofits give us some data through GuideStar Exchange, and I'll talk a bit more about those numbers later. But at this point, we only have 3 levels: bronze, silver, and gold. And in this little framework right here, we kind of lay out the kind of information that you provide at these different levels. And when I say quantitative data, I'm talking about numbers. And when I say qualitative data, I'm talking about words and sentences. And organizational data is data about the nonprofit itself. And programmatic data is data about the work done by the nonprofit. So quantitative organizational data might be something like your finances or the number of staff that you have. And qualitative programmatic data would be a sentence description of your goals and strategies and your measurement systems. What we have not had is a way to gather numbers about the programmatic work that nonprofits do. The number of people served and lives saved and acres protected. And so we're going to be introducing, over the course of this year, some new experiments in trying to figure out how do we best collect that kind of data in a way that will work for the nonprofits that provide it. And then hopefully we'll launch it as a formal 4th level of the GuideStar Exchange at some point soon. A second thing I'd like to mention are what are called APIs. So APIs are application programming interfaces. So this is some computer code that allows one computer to talk to another one, or one database to talk to another one. And so it can all happen automatically. Now, I mentioned the Simplify project, which is an API that allows our database to talk to the software that foundations use so that the information can flow automatically and a nonprofit doesn't have to enter it a bunch of different times. And we have launched several other APIs just in the last couple of months that have varying types of information at varying depths. They're designed for different user groups. There's 6 of them, and then we have an additional 8 versions of these that are free in various ways. And so we have 14 total ways that a computer programmer or a technology platform can tap into GuideStar's database and use our data. We think this is really, really important, and in a way it's a response to my friend at Google, because it's a way for our data to show up all throughout the internet in lots of different contexts, and for us to not just rely on GuideStar.org, even though that will continue to be an important part of what we do. So that's the basic framework of our strategic plan. And while we have, in a sense, finished it, I should say that with air quotes because it's going to be a living document. And we are continuing to take feedback on it, and we absolutely welcome that feedback from you. So you can go to npo.gs/GuideStar2020 to provide that feedback. And we'll be sending out this link in our follow-up email from this call. So please know that we'd welcome your thoughts on how to answer the question that I asked during my listening tour: how can GuideStar be most useful to the field? All right, let's move on to the second part of the call, which is reporting on GuideStar's programmatic results for the second quarter of 2014. Now, before I go into this in detail, let me just say, you probably noticed that we've been reporting on our programmatic results in an evolving way. We're still trying to figure out the very best way to track our mission impact in a way that really makes sense and that serves the needs of our stakeholders, but also helps us manage our work effectively. So it's an ongoing process for us. But you'll also see that there are a number of metrics which we've been reporting on quite consistently. And here I'll focus on the GuideStar Exchange participants. We are the first row about nonprofit sharing data with third-party portals. We've listed here, but we haven't actually collected that data yet because we need to do a stakeholder survey. We have been consistently reporting on GuideStar Exchange participants, and I've mentioned we crossed 100,000 this quarter, which was a great moment for us. But not all of those have reached one of our levels of participation, bronze, silver, or gold. Now, eventually we'll be adding platinum, but we don't have it yet. But glad to see that year over year, that is comparing this quarter, the second quarter of 2014 with the second quarter of 2013, we've had 58.5% growth. And quarter over quarter, we've had about 4% growth. So that's since last quarter. We feel good about that, but we want to continue to drive that rate of growth up. And you also will see that the silver number has gone down a bit, and that's partly because people have graduated up to gold, which we see as really terrific news. A second category are what we would call reach metrics. So these are metrics that give us a sense of how many people are we reaching, whether directly through our website or through APIs or other mechanisms. Now, you'll see here with the unique users that in the second quarter we were at about 1.7 million. Again, this is some solid growth over last year at this time, 6%. It's a little bit down from the first quarter, which, as far as we can tell, is just basic seasonality, which is that there are certain times of the year that people are more likely to search for information on GuideStar. So the year-over-year growth, we think, is more important than the quarter-over-quarter growth. And then similarly, something that's very exciting is seeing the 48,000 new registered users, a 9.5% growth over last year. And we really like that because that those are new people who become part of the GuideStar community, and really great data that we get about our user base, because when you register, we ask that you tell us what part of our community you're from. Are you from a nonprofit, or are you an individual donor, or are you a consultant or a journalist or a foundation staffer? And that helps us to design unique experiences for different users. We've also started more systematically collecting the number of pieces of data that we have, which, as I said before, is closing in on 2.5 billion. But we don't have historic data on that because we only just began tracking that consistently. And then, to go back to the APIs that I mentioned earlier, you'll see that in the second quarter we had about 9 million hits on an API. So that's an individual time that one program or database is asking our API to send it some data. And that's way up from last year, 71%. A little bit down from the first quarter, but again, we think that just reflects seasonality in our usage. With that, I'm going to close and hand it over to James Lum, our CFO, to talk about our financial results.
Thank you, Jacob. On the financials, I just want to point out, like I normally do, that our numbers are unaudited at this point, and it will roll into our audited numbers at the end of the year. And in general, our historical results are not necessarily indicative of future results, and all the forward-looking statements contain known and unknown risks that may result in future results that are materially different from historical results. That's a basic disclaimers. Jacob told you a lot about our plans for the future, our programmatic metrics, our mission-based metrics, and that describes all the things that we do to fulfill our mission, right? And, you know, we're a nonprofit, and most of the data that we circulate is to users who use our data for free. So now I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we hold everything together and the underlying financial metrics of what we're doing. So for Q2, our top-line performance was revenue was $2.8 million, and that's an improvement on both prior year and last quarter. We had about $160,000 more than prior year and $400,000 better than Q1. The primary drivers were that we got grants in Q2 of this year, whereas we did not get any grants in Q1, and we didn't have any grants in Q2 of last year. So we had $200,000 from the Hewlett Foundation and another $50,000 from the Packard Foundation. So that helped our revenue numbers. Membership was also up almost $100,000 for the quarter, and but product sales were down a little slightly by $50,000, and releases of grants from restrictions were down $100,000. So a lot of that is different aspects of timing of different revenue items, like you saw also in the first quarter. Expenses, on the other hand, were up about $300,000 compared to last year, and this is primarily driven by the investments that we've been making in restaffing personnel who had left earlier last year, and also new personnel and new areas that we need going forward to support the strategic plan. On our bottom line performance, cash flow for the quarter was positive, was $381,000. This is over $100,000 better than last year, so cash flow is improving. It was also significantly better than Q1 of this year. So sequentially, we did better as well. You know, first quarter, we had negative cash flow of $690,000. So year to date, with the positive cash flow that we have now, we're still at a negative position, but it's a lot better. It's down $300,000 for the year. And then what's important about that is that there is a strong amount of seasonality in our business. The first half of the year is better than the second half of the year. We're constantly juggling the timing of different types of revenue streams. So for us, and probably for many nonprofits, depending on what kind of business you have, timing is very important, and balancing things is very important. Not everybody has a steady, stream of revenue on a regular basis that you can work around. The cash flow for the quarter was boosted a lot by accounts receivable collections as well. So we had a $200,000 benefit to that. And what you see when you look at the GAAP operating income is it drops to only $48,000 for the quarter because the GAAP results do not include the accounting results from the accounts receivable collections. But we did have positive GAAP operating income in Q2, and that compares very favorably with both last year and Q1 when we had negative operating income. Negative operating income in Q1 was $300,000, and last year was negative $200,000. So that explains our financial results in very broad terms. Q2 is a big improvement over Q1 and also a big improvement over last year. Now, some financial highlights about our financial position. We have two debt payments that we're making right now. One is to Packard, and another one is to Wells Fargo. So we're in the last 12 months of our Packard payments right now, and then we have a 2-year hiatus from debt principal payments until 2018. So it gives us an opportunity to re-leverage the business in support of the strategic plan so we can we can fund all the different initiatives that we're going to have. So I think that's very important. And by having our debt payments go away next year, that's going to free up almost $500,000 in cash to plow back into our operations. That's another important aspect of that. And we're expecting the first tranches of our transformational capital campaign that we're in support of our strategic plan sometime towards the back half of this year. So that's the $10 million that's in the strategic plan that we're looking for. And then a couple of notes on the next slide about our full-year outlook. So we've reported on our Q1 and Q2 results. And looking at the back half of the year, the second half is always weaker seasonally. So product sales are going to go down a little bit compared to the first half. And we're seeking organic revenue opportunities in all of our lines of business right now. So we're having a sales audit being performed of our sales function to look at our direct product sales. We've been working very hard, and you've probably seen a lot of changes to our website, which are going to be reflected in our e-commerce opportunities. And many of our members should probably have already seen in the mail or will be getting soon in the mail paperwork that kind of details what our redesigned membership program looks like. And what we've done there is to try and help better articulate the movement across the spectrum of who uses GuideStar. So we have a large chunk of people who use GuideStar, approximately 97% of you, use GuideStar for free, right? And then the other 3% support us in one way or another, either directly through product sales and subscriptions, or people who get some sort of products but also support us in addition and enter the membership program. And then there's the other organizations who, beyond just supporting us through membership, give us grants and support on an unrestricted basis. And then, of course, there's also transformational capital foundations that are investing specifically in the long-term outlook of GuideStar. So that membership piece is the one that we're redesigning and realigning with the other pieces. And then, of course, like I said before, we're expecting the first rounds of our transformational capital grant campaign to start coming in Q4. So what you have there is you have slower product sales being offset by organic growth and grants coming in. On the expense side, expenses are pretty much going to be expected to be level for the back half of the year, consistent with what we've been running at in the first half of the year. The comparisons, when you see the comparisons year over year, instead of large increases year over year, they're going to become small increases year over year because we ramped up expenses at the end of last year. So that gap is naturally going to narrow. We'll be making some specific investments in a couple of things like replacing our GL system, disaster recovery. And we also have our upcoming 20th anniversary campaign, which we're going to have events around that we didn't speak about really earlier, but that'll be very interesting that we'll be celebrating that. We'll be issuing more details of that soon. And the bottom line is between revenue and expenses looking the way they are, it's very likely that Q3 and Q4, we're going to see a fair amount of negative cash flow. And this is going to be deliberate around our change from having a savings mindset, which was a necessity the last 2 years, and we set aside enough money to shift into an investment mindset. So at the end of last year and heading into this year, we've been making deliberate investments in things. And this is kind of self-funded initial kickoff for our transformational capital campaign, the kickoff for GuideStar 2020 campaign. It's what we can take on ourselves and get a head start on the activities that we need to get in place to see GuideStar going long term. So the last thing I'll wrap up with is the lessons that we've learned in Q2. And this kind of builds up off of the lessons that we learned in Q1. If you listen to the impact call that we had in Q1, we had almost $1 million turnaround to the negative side compared to Q1 of last year. And the lessons learned in Q1 was that timing is everything. In the respect that it was Q1's results were explained by the timing of a large number of grants that we got last year. And that's what made Q1 of this year seem to look so bad. Q2 has been a big improvement over Q1. And again, it's about timing. It's timing of grants that we got in Q2 that we didn't get in Q1 or last year. But the real lesson is that not only that timing is everything when you're looking at comparisons year over year, but timing is also important when you're trying to accomplish different things. And what we found, and we didn't really talk about in the rest of our speech today, our call today, is that a lot of things that we've been investing in and tackling and pursuing over the last year and a half have taken us a little bit longer than we had anticipated. So for instance, we've been talking about our strategic plan for quite a while in various iterations, but overall that process has taken longer than we anticipated. We've been making investments in personnel in order to support various programs and, redevelop the website and look at products and look at internal measurement systems, et cetera. And seeing that work translate into material or financial results has taken longer than we anticipated. Pursuing grants for the strategic plan has taken a little bit longer than we anticipated. Controlling expenses and turning our financials around and building a positive balance sheet, all that has taken longer than we anticipated. So I think that's the key lesson that we've learned is things always take longer than you plan for. And with that, I'll start off the Q&A and turn it over to Lindsay.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I do want to just make mention that we will send an email to all of you on the phone in just a few days. It will have a link to download the PowerPoint, and you can also listen to the recording there. First question is, which of the initiatives listed in GuideStar 2020 are you most excited about? And I think I lobby that up to both of you.
This is Jacob, and I'll just say that the GuideStar Platinum that I mentioned is the one that I'm most excited about. I think it may prove to be the most important thing that GuideStar ever does. And it may take a while for us to really, as James said, things always take longer than you expect them to. It may take a while for it to really get traction. But there is such a profound desire in the nonprofit field for us to be able to understand the results of the work that we do, and for us to be able to put that in quantitative terms in addition to qualitative terms. So we need numbers and stories and numbers. And the GuideStar Exchange Platinum will be the first systematic mechanism for gathering that data from across the nonprofit sector. And we're going to have to do a lot of experiments, and we'll have to pivot along the way to make it better as we learn what works. But the idea of actually bringing together that much quantitative information about the work that nonprofits do for people, communities, and ecosystems around the U.S. and around the world, to do that in a structured way that begins to allow us to roll up the work and the accomplishments across the nonprofit sector, that's really, really exciting. And that's something that I think justifies the ambition that we have here and the investment mindset that James talked about that we've been in financially in the last year.
I'd like to add one thing to that, Jacob, which is that's the data collection piece, which is really, really exciting, collecting programmatic and impact data. And what's most exciting about that is where it's going to go.
Yeah.
That in large part is the Simplify project, which is going to help facilitate collecting the data, but most importantly, take that data and move it to Foundation. And that'll create a nice little virtuous circle where you have data coming in and then data going out and then coming back in again.
I think that's right. And I think it'll be a real challenge for us to think about, Simplify really nails the distribution channel to foundations. But how do we then think about some other groups? Like, for example, policymakers. When you ask most people on Capitol Hill in Congress what nonprofits in their community do, they'll be able to give a couple anecdotes, but they won't be able to tell you anything systematic. And if we get GuideStar Platinum right, we can transform the way that policymakers, government officials of all kinds, understand the nonprofit sector. The same is true for journalists. So James is absolutely right. We really are, the collection is one half of the puzzle when it comes to GuideStar Exchange Platinum. But figuring out how to package and distribute that data is going to be a really interesting challenge and opportunity.
That's great. Tim Farrell, who, and I'm sorry if I pronounced that last name incorrectly, the Chief Operating Officer of Operation Homefront, asks, for those charities putting the administrative effort into answering the platinum-based criteria and questions, can those nonprofits expect specific GuideStar marketing or publicity on that achievement?
I mean, absolutely. And, we created, it's a really good question because, it's one thing for us to say, hey, give us some data. It's a whole other thing for us to say, hey, give us some data and here's what's in it for you. And, we exist to serve the nonprofit sector. We believe that collecting this data in a systematic way is going to be really good for nonprofits. But we also recognize that we've got to show that that's true. So there will be, a number of different mechanisms we'll use, and Lindsay, you may have something you want to add here as well. We do offer a set of incentives at various levels, which are discounts on other products and free services, et cetera. For example, free access to GuideStar's premium search at the gold level of participation, which is a $1,500 value. And so we will have to come up with specific incentives at the platinum level. We haven't determined that yet. Ultimately, what's most important, though, is how that information will be used by the stakeholders of the nonprofit itself. Will your donors see that? Will journalists in your community see that data? Will the policymakers that determine the legal framework that nonprofits operate within see that data? And we have to do a good enough job on the distribution side to prove to nonprofits that they're entering the data on the collection side will really be worth their time. And we take that as a very real challenge. Any of my colleagues have anything to add to that?
No, that's great. This is Lindsay, and I, of course, work in communications and marketing, so this is a question right up my alley. There's kind of two ways I think about it. We're a community, all of us who participate in the GuideStar Exchange. So not only does GuideStar want to really promote your great work and support you, but we want to give you the tools to promote yourself. And so we actually have a few mechanisms right now. We have something we just call the promotion toolkit, where you can just easily take language and grab it and go. So it's hopefully not a whole lot of effort on your part. But it is something that I think we can collaborate on. And with Platinum, there's that much more time invested. There's going to be that much more time invested on GuideStar side, too. So that's a great question. We're getting a bunch of congratulations on our 20th anniversary, so I thought we should touch on that. I think this is the last question. How do you engage your board in changes taking place within your organization?
So this has been an ongoing question between the staff and the board. We have a new board chair, Mari Qureshi, who started in that role in January of this year. And whenever you have a new board chair, it's an opportunity to think afresh about the role of the board. We have been showing them iterations of the strategic plan quite consistently over the last almost 2 years, from initial frameworks to initial drafts to a final version. And, one lesson that I've very much learned is that when you're working with a board, there are certain kinds of questions where you really want it to be open-ended. But I will say a lesson I've learned is that on certain types of questions, you really have to be specific with a board about exactly what you're looking for. And we really have to frame those questions in a way that make really good use of the time that board members are devoting to an organization. So I think it really varies according to which kind of question you're asking them, whether it's on big picture strategy questions or internal process questions. And, it's something that has really varied. Our board has some particularly deep expertise in business strategy and in user interface design, and then also on questions of nonprofit measurement. So we have often been inclined to really engage with them on those questions. And then I'll also add that it sometimes breaks down functionally, so that, for example, when we have big finance questions that we're facing, we often are running those by the finance committee of our board. But I'll also say that I think, we're certainly learning that boards are evolving creatures, just like organizations. And our own board, as we bring on new members, as some members term out, as we refine how we communicate with them, we're continually evolving the way that we tap into the talents and the wisdom and experience that our board is able to provide.
Great. We have a couple more questions coming in. Does GuideStar see the field becoming more competitive in terms of data collection efforts and organizational development? Good question.
So I actually think, a lot of it depends on how good a job we do at GuideStar. If we do a really good job on GuideStar Exchange, the field will become less competitive because we will offer the definitive data collection mechanism, and then we will distribute it through lots of other channels. So our hope is that a couple years from now, once we've had a chance to really implement this strategy, that we'll see that the field has become less competitive, but more efficient. And, those two things don't always go well together. I mean, competition can be very good for building efficiency, but this is one case where right now, in a way, there's so much competition that it's really not good for nonprofits. There's a lot of wasted time out there filling out forms on 1,000 different websites. There's no one playing quite the role that GuideStar is playing, but we think if we do it really well that we can save nonprofits a lot of time. I will say on the second part, though, around organizational development, I would anticipate seeing more entrants into that field, consultants and tools and writers and advisors who are helping nonprofits become stronger organizations. And that's one, I think that could be really good because there is an immense amount of need for nonprofits to get help and advice in figuring out how to strengthen their own work. So I guess my answers are no and yes.
I'd like to say something about that as well, and focus on the word competition. I'd say that there's not that much competition in the respect that there's a lot of data collection efforts, but they're not really in competition with each other, nor are they in cooperation with each other.
Yeah.
There's a lot of data collection by foundations, research groups, nonprofits themselves, et cetera, and they're doing it all in silos to a certain extent. They're not the same kinds of information. They're not about the same kinds of things, so they don't compete with each other directly. It would be nice if everybody was actually collecting the same kinds of data to the point that you could have a question about competition or cooperation. And there definitely is some competition, but I think that it's so far apart that to a large degree, that's not even the correct word yet.
Yeah.
So I think that's all the questions we have. I want to take a moment. Two different organizations reached out and told us the Hispanic Flamenco Ballet Ensemble is attempting to become a bronze level participant, so we're really excited.
All right.
And Crossroads, Iowa is at silver and said they will work towards platinum. So we are thrilled to have you on the call and then part of that larger community. So thank you so much, Jacob and James, and thanks to all of you for taking time out of your day and for participating and asking such great questions. We hope to see you on our next Impact Call on November 10th at 2 p.m. You can register at npo.gs/impactcall4. And please let us know what you think about GuideStar 2020 and our vision for the future of the social sector. You can go to npo.gs/GuideStar 2020. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thanks, folks.